This episode of the Monocle Daily was first broadcast on Friday, the 4th of October, 2024.
It's 2000 in Beirut, 1900 in Vienna, 1800 here in London, and 9 a.m. in Anchorage. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. Hezbollah may have lost its second Secretary-General in a week. Austria grapples with the results of last weekend's election, and the most gruesome Fat Bear Week scandal yet. I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers whose horseshoes landed furthest from the stake are Laura Kramer, Chris Chermak, Andrew Tuck and Tom Edwards. They'll discuss the day's stuff, and we'll have a song from Buzzcocks guitarist Steve Diggle. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and we will start in Lebanon, which is subject to both further Israeli airstrikes and further Israeli evacuation orders. However, at least one Israeli airstrike appears to have cratered one of the routes by which Lebanese people were seeking safety, which is, with desperately bleak irony, the road into Syria. Another Israeli airstrike on Beirut appears to have been directed at Hezbollah's rumoured new Secretary-General, Hashem Safiuddin. His whereabouts are uncertain as of this broadcast. Well, I'm joined now by David Hale, former US ambassador to Pakistan, Jordan and Lebanon, former US Special Envoy for Middle East Peace, Global Fellow at the Wilson Center and author of the new book, American Diplomacy Towards Lebanon. Ambassador, welcome to the show. Whatever the whereabouts or condition of Hashem Safiuddin, do you think we are seeing the beginning of an end to Hezbollah?
Well, thank you, Andrew. One can only hope so. This is an organization that has been the source of chaos and death for decades, and it would be very welcome. Although I would caution that while Nasrallah is dead, and maybe his cousin and successor, Hezbollah is not yet dead. And it is deeply damaged, decapitated, but has had a history. I've been in and out of Lebanon for 40 years. It's had a history of turning even moments of crisis and despair into survival. And they have a devoted popular base among Lebanese Shia. Apart from being a terrorist organization and a militia, they are also a social and political organization that has defended the Shia people up until now. And that they've eliminated all opposition brutally, and so there is no real alternative. So a lot of work would have to be done to bring this home to the point you just described.
Is it a reasonable assumption, though, that the United States, obviously, which has declared Hezbollah a terrorist organization, but also a lot of Arab states would be quietly happy to let Israel get on with it?
Oh, absolutely. Hezbollah has no friends among Arab leaders, and although there are times when it's been popular among Arab populations because of the sort of David and Goliath dynamic with Israel, but that's not the case now. And I think that, frankly, there will be few tears shed if Hezbollah is really, truly decimated. But that's, again, a lot of work would have to be done. And frankly, the ground operation that Israel is beginning to undertake is a cause of concern, because if they truly desire to have a limited, finite operation there, that would be, necessary perhaps to achieve Israeli objectives. But the longer, if there's mission creep, and the longer a ground operation turns into an occupation, that's exactly the kind of thing that Iran and Hezbollah would be exploiting.
Also, how much of a concern is there about a potential power vacuum being created in the parts of Lebanon where Hezbollah is or was perhaps more or less the presiding state? Because it was, of course, a power vacuum like that caused by the Lebanese civil war of 75 to 90 in which Hezbollah coalesced in the first place.
Right. I mean, my sense is from talking to people that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, have sort of semi-invisible men who are running Hezbollah now in the absence of layers and layers of their leaders who've been decapitated. But the Shia population, no doubt, is fearful and confused right now and in a highly emotional state. But there's no alternative sort of waiting in the wings to come in. The secular leadership of the Shia has been really decimated by by Hezbollah itself. They didn't want an alternative. And Lebanon's a deeply divided country. So the other elements, the Maronite Christians, the Sunni Muslims, can't really fill the void when it comes to the Shia. The state of Lebanon, unfortunately, it really has no capacity. They're on their knees. It's a weak organization to begin with. So again, a lot of work by the United States and other partners to build up the Lebanese army, get it in a position where maybe it can start to, as you say, fill some of these vacuums as they're created by the Israelis. Could work, but they're not going to go against Hezbollah. It would have to be in coordination with the Lebanese Shia population itself to avoid a bloodbath.
I know it's always easy to ask these questions in hindsight, but you mentioned the Lebanese state and the Lebanese military, and it is amazing how often it is forgotten in discussions of Lebanon that there actually is a Lebanese state or a Lebanese military. Is there more that perhaps could or should have been done over the last few decades to buttress both of those institutions, or has the view of overseas partners, including the United States, been more or less that Lebanon's state, Lebanon's government, such as it is unsalvageable?
Well, we've done a lot, as have other partners, to boost up the Lebanese army, but it's not by doctrine. It's an army that can't take on its own different communities because it would then split apart on sectarian lines. So it was never our intention to have it as a force against Hezbollah. The intention is that it'll be an alternative when perhaps as moments like this emerge, that it is capable of filling the gap. The problem with the state of Lebanon, I mean, there are many, but the source, the root of the evil is that 80 years ago, 17 different jealous religious communities came together to agree to form Lebanon after the end of World War II. And they didn't want any one community to lord it over the other, so they created the weakest possible state. And most of the power, real power, lies with communal leaders rather than the state of Lebanon. And that has been a dysfunction that is very hard for outsiders to fix. And right now, not only do they have that problem, but they have had a political gridlock, thanks partly to Hezbollah. They don't have a president. They don't have a fully empowered prime minister or cabinet. And these things aren't going to be fixed with a magic wand in any timescale that is necessary to deal with this crisis.
But if fixing it is desirable, and I think it probably is, does that become any easier if Hezbollah is removed as a factor?
I think that it is the dream of anyone who is trying to restore Lebanese sovereignty, and that is the dream of many, many Lebanese. Then removing Hezbollah's arms and its ability to dictate through those arms and ride over the sovereignty of the state is critical. And so this is a huge opportunity, but we have to be thoughtful and deliberative about it. I mean, right now, the Shia community has no leadership, and Lebanon can't really achieve anything based on their constitution or the nature of the society unless there's a certain element of consensus. So there are going to have to be others who speak for the Shia community that can say, yes, it's time to move on. Yes, we're prepared to be flexible and to compromise. And in an environment in which the Israelis are occupying territory and there continues to be these exchanges of missiles. And by the way, Hezbollah still has enormous amounts of weaponry and deep layer after layer of rank and file members who are armed and angry. So I don't think we can jump too fast to rebuilding Lebanon.
Ambassador, just before we let you go, I'd like to take a look at the wider picture. We saw Iran's Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, giving a sermon, the first such in nearly 4 years today, urging the Middle East, by which I assume he means the Arab nations of the Middle East, because there's not really anybody else, to unite against a common enemy, by which he means Israel, though he won't actually utter its name out loud. Do we imagine, though, at this point that those Arab states, those ones who we mentioned, are no great fans of Hezbollah, are going to be any greater fans of his and any more willing to take Iran's side in any kind of conflict with Israel?
The Arab states are looking to who has power. Where is power being exercised? And until recently, that was Iran. So they were absolutely not allying with Iran, but they were much more inclined to concede and compromise and try to have some kind of détente. That's all shifted. Not because of us. The United States has been more or less absent. It's because of Israel and Israel's ability to suddenly and finally begin to rebalance the scales in the Middle East and restore dominance to those factions and elements that are counter to Iran and that Iran wants to destroy. And so that will bring the Arabs much more into line with our traditional thinking that we need an alliance that will stabilize the Middle East based on containing at best, if not more, Iran. And I'm glad you raised Iran at the end here, because we were talking about Lebanon, but the real answer is not in Lebanon. The answer is in Tehran. And we have to change the will and motivation of the leadership there if we want to avoid waking up every morning with the possibility of what we're seeing today.
And just finally, do you think there is any realistic prospect of changing that will and that motivation of the Iranian leadership without changing the Iranian leadership?
But I don't think an explicit regime change policy or set of operations is likely to succeed. And to put it in those terms, will alienate a lot of Iranians who are deeply nationalist, even if unhappy with their own leadership. Instead, I think you have to apply pressure where the Iranians know that it's not their Arab allies who are paying the price, it's them. And we've begun to see that. So I would continue to keep tightening the noose on the proxies, but also more and more where the Iranians are staring into an abyss in which they will begin to pay human prices as well as economic prices. Remember, our sanctions are not really being enforced. And then we may see a shift in attitudes that can help us achieve our goals.
David Hale, former US ambassador to Lebanon, author of the book American Diplomacy Towards Lebanon. Thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. It is now 5 days since Austria's parliamentary election was won by the Freedom Party, or FPO, an unsavoury sack of far-right seethers who seem notably fonder of Vladimir Putin than they do of many actual citizens and residents of Austria. However, while the FPO won the most votes, they did not win anywhere close to a majority of seats, but they may struggle to find willing partners to form a governing coalition. Austria's President Alexander Van der Bellen has appealed for calm while everybody figures out what happens next. And joining me with more on this is Monocle's senior news editor and resident semi-Austrian, Chris Chermak. Chris, what does actually happen next?
Well, so actually what you saw today, earlier today, is that Herbert Kickl, the head of the Freedom Party, the FPÖ, met with Alexander Van der Bellen, who, as you said, is the one urging for calm. And this is the one place where he has some power. You know, the president in Austria is not a particularly powerful position. It's more of a ceremonial role. But this is the area where he does have a role because he has to say who is going to be designated to try and form a government, which party. And he has been a little vague on this. Traditionally, it is, of course, the largest party, but he doesn't have to go that way. So he met with Herbert Kickl today. He will meet with the other party leaders at the start of next week, and then he will make a decision about who is best placed to actually potentially form a coalition going forward.
An Austrian president trying to decide whether to install a far-right rabble-rouser as chancellor, the historical parallels do rather right themselves. There was possibly for that reason a biggish protest in Vienna yesterday urging other parties not to go into coalition with the FPO. I mean, how much, obviously not everybody in Austria is unhappy about the FPO winning. 29% of Austrians voted for them, but among the 71% who didn't, how much angst is there?
Well, just to pick up on that point from starting with the president, to be fair in this case, because Alexander Van der Bellen is from the Green Party and he is no fan of the FPÖ.
Indeed
and
not.
He has absolutely made clear that he does not want the FPÖ in charge. And so I think he is leading, if you will, that movement, even though he has to be the president and therefore has certain obligations. He is leading that movement of angst that you describe. The angst is large. I'd say there was a large-ish protest in Vienna last night, around 40,000 people or so. It's not the largest it's ever been. I think there's a bit of a weariness maybe sometimes in Austria at this point because we have been facing this issue for a long time. The Freedom Party gets into power, it falls out of power and scandal, it gets back into power, it falls back out of power and scandal. So this is kind of the third iteration of that. And so we're going to see what happens. I think what's interesting is once again, though, to this point of the coalition building, the fact that the other parties aren't necessarily willing to work with the Freedom Party and particularly not willing to work with its leader, Herbert Kickl. that's maybe where, the angst is a little bit mollified, because the prospects of, unlike some other countries, the Freedom Party being able to rule on its own, to do what it wants, that seems very unlikely. If they get into power, probably not with their current head, and they would have to moderate some of their positions, or they don't get into power at all.
So are the options then exactly those, i.e. the next Chancellor is from the FPO but is not Herbert Kickl? It's ideally somebody less obviously unpleasant from within the FPO's ranks, or can incumbent Chancellor Karl Nehammer realistically politically stay on? If you've led your party into an election and you've not only got beaten, you've been beaten by a sack of far-right rabble-rousers, do you still have the legitimacy to stick around?
Well, that is the question, but I think he is leading this charge, which is what makes him powerful right now, because in some ways, despite having lost, the People's Party, ÖVP, are the kingmakers here, because they would be the ones that would potentially form a coalition with the Freedom Party. And Karl Nehammer has been the one who is outspoken, saying, I might consider joining a coalition with the Freedom Party. I will not, under any circumstances, join one with Herbert Kickl, the leader. So the fact, I think, that he has been so outspoken about this is what gives him some credence and some authority, and why even the People's Party wants him to stay. There is that chance that, therefore, he could become Chancellor again. If he rejects Herbert Kickl, if Herbert Kickl says, I don't care, I'm staying, maybe the People's Party, the Social Democrats, basically every other party, you'd need sort of the two main center parties, and then you need some of the smaller ones to join forces together to form a kind of anti-FPÖ unity coalition. That's essentially what would happen. And who knows, that could actually be with Chancellor Karl Nehammer once again.
What do we understand by now about who the FPO's people are? I mean, as you say, it's not like they're a new thing. They're not an insurgency like, Alternative for Deutschland, perhaps. They have a history that goes back decades. They have been in government before, and as you said, they have usually left it again in somewhat farcical circumstances. But who are their people? Is this another one of those city versus country things, or is the split somewhere else?
It's a little bit of a city versus country thing, as it is everywhere, frankly, in Europe. I think it is important to say, for some context, that over the last 10 years, Austria has taken in more migrants than any other European country per capita. So that is something that you're seeing in lots of parts of Austria, and is obviously a key part of this debate. And yeah, even if you look at Vienna, which by far and away is the big power center, the big city, yes, the Social Democrats typically win there, like in any other country for the big city. But the Freedom Party, for example, in Vienna itself got 20%. So we're not talking about, these sort of that you have in a London or others where like the left is so much more powerful. So it does show you that, yes, city-country divide, but it is relatively broad-based right now.
Semi-related development, possibly in a neighbouring country we should touch on before we let you go, which is a peace march. I put the peace in implied inverted commas there, in Berlin, wanting, among other things, an end to Germany's support of Ukraine. They seem to be of that tendency who think that Ukraine capitulating would miraculously solve absolutely everything. Is this, though, is this a serious tendency in German politics? Do these people have an audience? Do they have a constituency? Do they have any representatives?
Well, yes, in a word, and I think that's why this is actually a very interesting demonstration and debate that you had. This was a protest that was held on the Day of German Unity, which is German Unification Day, and they're sort of trying to reclaim that Cold War era, those peace demonstrations in Germany. And this one is led, unlike, say, in Austria, the far right, this one is led by the far left. And so the main speaker was Sarah Wagenknecht. She is a new force on the left in Germany. She is very outspoken. She speaks about wanting to speak and negotiate with Vladimir Putin. She is of that ilk. But what is interesting when you look at a debate like this is it is this revival, right? In Germany, you've often had this tradition of those who have not wanted Germany to play any military role. This is something that with Ukraine has obviously been changing. We've had the Zeitenwende and Olaf Scholz, declaring that Germany now has to play a military role. There is this constituency in Germany that wants peace at all costs, if you will, and for Germany not to be involved militarily. What was also interesting at this protest, though, was for one social democrat was part of this, Ralf Stegner, and he gave quite an outspoken speech, but then also at other points in the media has been talking about that we cannot cede the word peace to the populace. populists, and that this is something that has been a tradition in Germany, but is not something that should be left to the far left. The Social Democrats have a place here. What are the costs of peace, right? What do you need to do to create peace? And therefore, what do you need to do to defend Ukraine? So he has made that argument. He even tried to make that argument about Russia's aggression at this very rally. So it is an interesting debate that's happening right now in Germany.
Chris Cermak, thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Monocle Daily.
Funny how many people get these things wrong. I go into a lot of jazz clubs and I go, what made you build it like this?
Everyone's got an opinion about design these days. Join us on a journey to cut through the noise as we sit down with some of the design greats.
It's possible to really improve how we live and how we work through design.
We also have you covered on everything from architecture to product design to fonts and fashion too.
She has her own signature and creates beautiful and also comfortable clothes that women can really spend their days in.
Make sure you tune in every Tuesday at 2000 London time for Monocle's weekly design show, Monocle on Design, or find it wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Mueller. And this time next week, guests at Monocle's annual Quality of Life conference will be halfway through 3 days of enlightening conversation, instructive panel discussions, excellent food, and the superlative setting of this year's host city, Istanbul. Taking a break from his packing to tell us what awaits is Monocle's head of radio, Tom Edwards. Tom, nice fez.
Andrew, that is insensitive. I have a fez for radio, so they say. No, listen, in all seriousness, what excitement. Counting down to the Quality of Life conference. I'm sure I've joined you before to talk about previous iterations starting, I don't know, it must be almost a decade ago in Lisbon, crisscrossing Europe, amazing cities, incredible speakers, wonderful delegates drawn from so many markets. I'm particularly, Andrew, excited about this year's edition.
Well, so you should be. And I did want to ask about the setting. Not that anybody ever needs a reason to go to Istanbul or stage anything in Istanbul. It's a fabulous, fabulous city. But why did we settle on that one this year?
Well, I think if you consider how Istanbul's long been covered by Monocle in audio, on it in the printed page as well, it's a place that has an amazing spirit and energy. Lots of these cliches, you know, unhelpfully, East meets West and so forth. But it's a beautiful place, but it has this incredible dynamism. And I think, obviously, Monocle's lens is often trained on business, entrepreneurship, a can-do attitude. And I think we're excited to bring that energy to those who assemble there, and maybe little bits of it to our audience globally who can't join us on the Friday, the big day, but as you said, on the Thursday and the Saturday, where there's some other exciting bits and bobs that happen, Andrew.
So among those exciting bits and bobs, who is speaking this year?
Well, we've got some amazing speakers, and I think people who are familiar with the conference will know that what we like to do is get into the weeds of some thorny issues, but kind of make sure we're cocking a smile. Very positive, very solutions-oriented. So some of our speakers range from partners at Foster & Partners, the architect Richard England, who can talk about building better. But we also like to ensure that we're reflecting some of the other components of great cities and great dynamic society. So in the cultural realm, I'm really excited to have, I think I'm right in saying, both the writer and a star from one of the sort of key Turkish TV exports, Andrew, which will be very, very exciting. Look, we've got the mayor of Istanbul is joining us. So we have people in, the public realm. We have cultural luminaries. One I want to mention as a standout.
Go on,
Andrew. From the briny deep to the sun-kissed squares of Istanbul.
I know who you're building up here. Literally one of our favourite listeners to the Foreign Desk.
Well, indeed, and inexplicably a fan of yours, given she's a woman of such impeccable judgment. Taylor Shepherd, who has sort of been a correspondent with Monocle, letting us know, as I say, that she likes the work you do, Andrew. But she's going to join us and talk a little bit about life under the sea and some of the unique challenges and opportunities that throws around. And that's
we should specify she's an officer on a US Navy submarine.
Well, indeed. And what I think is great about that is it's classic. That's classic Monocle and conference fare. not someone you would anticipate speaking to, but it will be an unforgettable exchange. And I think if we zoom out a little bit, that's what's always on the agenda at these events. It's not just about the compelling narratives that you hear from the speakers. It's about the people you meet, the friendships you make. This sounds like something like I'm advertising some sort of US summer camp, but there's an amazing mood of, proactivity. To convene all these interesting people, Andrew, is always amazing. And, on the margins of the conference, deals will be done, friendships made. It's a really exciting time. I can't wait to get there.
Just finally, and perhaps to further lull any listeners who may have been tempted by the last few minutes, you've been to a few of these by now. Can you maybe part with a couple of your more repeatable memories from years of the Quality of Life conference to give people some sort of flavour of what really goes on at these things?
Goodness me, that's a challenge. The things that are burned into the memory banks are often quite edgy. We have had some extraordinary contributions. I'm trying to quickly think. One thing that we always try and do...
If you can remember the Quality of Life conference, you weren't really
I'm
there.
Is it ever like Woodstock? What we try and do is, everyone there's a lot of flim-flam about health and well-being, living well. I think at Monocle we cover it in a bit more of a rigorous way. And we've had some absolutely amazing input over a few recent editions from literal brain surgeon to tell you how to ensure you're keeping the old grey matter as fresh as it can be, particularly relevant, Andrew, for a man like yourself. We followed that up with a heart doctor to talk about heart health and how you need to, exercise and challenge your heart, and how the rest of your musculature, bad news for you, Andrew, can speak to how healthy your heart is, because it's all kind of integrated. And this year there will be a medical detour. Now, if I say to you, Turkey, medical treatments, for example, does that take you anywhere straight away?
It absolutely does, because I have been to Istanbul within the last few years, and
the transplant's bedded in well, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I have not myself and would not, because I don't really care all that much, but until the penny dropped, I was really disconcerted, because I was walking around Istanbul, having got off an overnight train on which I had not slept terribly well. Which
you were looking fresh.
Which may have been part of the problem. So I was a bit disoriented, but you just sort of see these people, quite noticeable numbers of men of a certain age, walking around with sort of bloodied scalps and their heads wrapped in bandages. And you just think, what is, and then you go, oh, that's what's going on.
Well, if you want to scratch a little bit beneath the surface, not literally get into the sort of follicles of the matter, we are going to have on-stage testimonial from one of the key figures, a luminary from the hair transplant scene, Andrew, and he's going to be sharing some invites. I wish I had, but I quickly come up with a few. I hope that there's a nice parting when he moves on. Does he get to the root of the matter? Other permeations, etc.
How
exciting will that be?
We really need a gong in this studio.
Do you want me to ask him if he'll do your rate?
No, I do look forward to seeing what you come back with, though, Tom. I expect to see a new Tom Edwards.
Well, you probably will in more ways than one. I've heard that Istanbul will do that to people, Andrew.
Thank you for joining us, Tom. A few tickets for this year's conference are still available. See conference.monocle.com for details. You are listening to The Daily.
The Menu, bringing you Monocle's recipe for the best in drinking and dining. We make entertaining a doddle.
It's incredibly easy to make.
With expert opinions.
You can use fish fillets, which you grill in the oven or pan fry.
A bit of seasoning.
Lots of lime, a lot of cracked pepper, and a bit of good olive oil.
And plenty of spice.
And then you cook it in caraway and 7 spice.
As well as something sweet.
Then you take a big pot of mascarpone and spoon it into your egg yolk.
And maybe even a little bit nuts.
You take it out, you top it with some pine nuts, and you're good to go.
It's a recipe that's guaranteed to impress.
It's slightly controversial, but it's the one thing that has surprised the most people when they eat it.
Premiering live every Friday at 2000 London time, midday in Los Angeles, or downloadable wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to The Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller. It seems like it comes round earlier every year. Fat Bear Week, the annual contest in which an online world can vote for which of the ursine denizens of Alaska's Katmai National Park has grown most pleasingly rotund in anticipation of hibernation. The kick-off of this year's Fat Bear Week has been delayed, however, by a combination of scandal and tragedy. Joining me with more on this after a big pause is Monocle's Bear Desk Chief, Laura Kramer. I worked on that all afternoon.
I know you did.
I think it was worth it. Laura, we must consider the ghastly events that have delayed this year's Fat Bear Week. In sum, what has happened?
Well, Andrew, a fight broke out between bears, causing one of them to sadly die. Officials say the bears were well known to the park and the park staff for more than 20 years, actually. So they've dubbed Bear 469, a.k.a. Patches, an older male, and Bear 402, an older female. It was an all-out brawl, Andrew. It was an ugly scene, unfortunately, and one of them died in the Brooks River by drowning. And the incident, unfortunately, was also all witnessed live on the webcams that they have for Fat Bear Week.
Not really the heartwarming effect that they are seeking to achieve. Do we know for the bear that perpetrated this atrocity, is this disqualifying?
Well, 469 did not make the bracket, so we don't know if that was the incident that did it, but he does have a record because in September 2010, he was spotted having a play fight with another bear in the river. But controversy seems to surround this bear because he was also observed guarding a bear carcass in October 2012. We don't know if he killed that bear, but I'm just saying he hasn't made the cut for this year.
Is this worse, do we think, than the great voter fraud scandal of 2022? It is not the first time that Fat Bear Week has occasioned controversy.
No, the scandal of 2022, a dark chapter in Fat Bear Week history, because that was when Bear 747, the legend known as Bear Force One, he fought off not just hunger, Andrew, but also controversy to claim the second title in 3 years. Now, during a semifinal matchup with Holly, the votes suddenly, very oddly, surged in her favor late in the day. Too late, in fact. And the park discovered that Holly had racked up some suspicious ballots, a move that even Putin, I think, would probably call bold, if I would say. But anyway, several thousand fraudulent votes were tossed out, and Bear Force One soared to victory by 7,000 votes. And to ensure no more fishy business is happening, they've added the ultimate safeguard, which is the CAPTCHA test. So you now have to prove that you're not a robot or, in fact, a rogue salmon.
This has been going on for a while, Fat Bear Week, and there have been years in which, in fairness, there isn't voter fraud and nobody gets killed. If it all goes according to plan, what is the purpose of any of this?
Well, I think it's a nice interaction between humans and nature, obviously for conservation efforts. It really highlights the plight of bears. It's really fun. It's great. Who doesn't like to see really rotund bears eating a lot? That's mostly it, to be honest. And the bears don't know what's happening. They don't know if they've won or not. And that's the real shame here, Andrew.
Of course not. They're bears.
Even the bear that wins doesn't get like here are some 5 salmon for you for free. Well done eating so much, you know? I think they should. Regular
listeners to The Daily will have heard you quite recently talking about bears and interacting with bears and how one goes about that, because you are it's not like we appoint anybody bear desk chief here at Monocle. It has to be somebody who does understand the field. What advice would you pass on for dealing with the bear to our listeners? Is it basically just don't?
Stay away from bears is what I would say. They are hungry and actively trying to stuff their faces with basically anything they can put their grubby claws on. So I would say the best interaction with bears is from a safe distance, like the bear cams for Fat Bear Week.
I mean, are these bears in Alaska at all familiar to you from the ones that you grew up, at least in the vicinity of, in Romania?
These are brown bears, so they are similar to the ones in Romania. But I do think that they're fatter because we don't have salmon in Romania. So there's not this big river that goes through. Actually, when I think about it, what do the bears in Romania eat? That's why they keep coming to the villages, Andrew.
That is something that, as both our bear desk chief and Romania desk chief, I would expect you to know, Laura.
I will look into it, Andrew.
Please do, because this doubtless won't be the last time we talk about Fat Bear Week. And on which note, do you have a tip for this year?
Well, I think that 128 Grazer, who was last year's Fat Bear Week champion, she's a highly defensive mother who delivered 2 cubs. And sadly, this year, she lost one of her cubs. I think she'll pull really well with the audience because of this fact.
Sympathy vote.
Exactly. It'll pull at heartstrings. She's experienced hardship. But I think 2 other bears to watch. I personally did vote for Grazer before the show, by the way. It's the voting opened. So far, she had 17,964 votes already. I think she's looking very good. But 2 bears I wouldn't rule out. One is Gully, 903 Gully, nicknamed Gully because of his love of eating seagulls, right? He learned life lessons. It's true. He learned life lessons from Grazer. So he's picking up her notes. He knows what to do. But I think her biggest contender will actually be 32 Chuck. He's the only one I see giving her really a run for her money. He was once observed eating 42 salmon in 10 hours. Impressive motivation and just really a snout for success, Andrew.
Laura Kramer on Monocle's Bear Desk, thank you for joining us. Finally on today's show, live music. And for all that punk rock was both embraced and dismissed circa the late 1970s as a flash in the pan, whether cleansing fire or aberrant fad, it is extraordinary how the best records of the genre have endured. Nothing by The Damned, the Sex Pistols, the Clash or the Saints sounds especially antique, nearly half a century on. Few of the era's records, however, have aged as well as those of Buzzcocks, whose perfectly poised lovelorn laments still evoke a parallel timeline in which Smokey Robinson somehow joined the Ramones. Lead guitar on Buzzcocks' peerless pop singles was played by Steve Diggle, now author of a memoir entitled Autonomy, Portrait of a Buzzcock. Steve came to Midori House earlier, and before he played us one of those songs, I asked him if, as he was writing it all down, anything about his own life surprised him.
Well, it's a bit like a Proust in Remembrance Things Past, because I did it with like a co-writer. So, to be honest, we sat out in between touring. We used to sit outside a pub every Monday, and we'd drink about 8 pints of Guinness, and he'd ask me a question, and I'd remember things about it. And so, as opposed to sort of sitting there with a blank sheet of paper going, what was my life about? It's always something that triggers something off. If somebody asks you something, then, I've got a story about that, and that's how it seems to work. So I was going to write myself a couple of years ago, and I thought, I haven't got the time. We're, busy doing all these other things. So I let him just fire the questions and kind of did it like that. Answered and, elaborated on anything he said, really. I've got a story that attaches with that. So it sort of grew organically like that. So I wasn't sure what he was going to put or where it was going to go in a sense,
Was there a point at which that you can recall the nascent Buzzcocks were looking at each other and thinking, we might actually be quite good? Because I think that's any number of people form bands, millions of bands get started, most of them are absolutely no use at all. But was there a moment for you where you started thinking, we could actually be onto something here?
Yeah, from the first rehearsal, actually. We rehearsed in a local priest gave us the afternoon to rehearse in the church or in some church hall there. And I knew from the first rehearsal the dynamic was right, If we had these songs, then they just came together immediately, and you felt there was some magic there. So you kind of knew it was something special, really. It was almost like you didn't have to try in a way, Even though, personally, all of us, particularly me and Pete, did a lot of off-the-ball work of how we were, you just knew it was there. It was like, wow, this sounds amazing from the first rehearsal, which is quite astonishing, because when we did get a rehearsal place, you could hear people next door with their fingers in their ear, kind of, going, that's the intro, now we're going to do it. We'd go, look, we've got a song, if I had a song or Pete had a song, it goes like this, and the rest of the band would jump in, and it'd be there, you know.
I mean, the book does capture very well what feels like a certain manic urgency around the punk scene of the late 70s, because, you know, this idea of like, is this going to be a thing? Will it last? Nearly half a century later, amazingly, a lot of those Buzzcocks records really have lasted. Does that surprise you to think that, well, that long afterwards, they're still part of the cultural firmament?
Yes, because, I mean, it was all for the moment. You didn't really plan on if it was going to have, where the next gig was or what was going to happen, really, you know. It was like there for the moment, for the now, you know. And it was the same with the songs. I mean, the inspiration was, I think we used to go in at 1 o'clock. We knew the pubs opened at 5:30. So we'd be banging out these tunes and, come on, we've got to get to the pub at 5:30. Next minute, there'd be hits and on top of the pops. There's something about working fast and stuff like that. They're kind of timeless, and also recorded live. We'd pick the best of 3 backing tracks and just put the guitar riffs and the backing vocals and vocals on. So you kind of had like a live performance as well each time, which I think is a key. It captured the spontaneity of the moment, and so every time it's almost like a live performance, which I think gives it that thing where they sound like they've just been recorded last week.
Well, you are going to play one of them for us. Introduce it if you would.
Well, this is Harmony in My Head. Like I said, I wrote Promises and Pete, I'd never fallen in love and all this stuff. We'd done Top of the Pops about 8 times. And I thought we needed a song to match Anarchy in the UK. So I smoked 20 cigarettes and I thought, remember Little Richard and Paul McCartney in Let It Be with that, oh, darling voice, that kind of rough voice. So I sang it like that, and I thought, it's got to be a steam train coming at you, you know, a roller coaster straight at you. And Tim was doing Top of the Box regularly. It was like, let's go along with Harmony in My Head. Thanks, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Say whenever I'm in doubt about things I do, I listen to the high surrendering sounds in the queue. Go out for my walk and singing social news. Don't let it get me down while I'm longing the tune. Yeah, well, I'm out in the open, clanking shoppers around. Yeah, the neon signs that take your eyes to town. Your thoughts are choking your world is advertising now. And extravagance matters to worshippers of the pound. But it's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in my head. Tortured faces, expressions out aloud. Life's little irony seems so obvious now. Yeah, you're casting checks and place their payments down. And there's a line of bus to go into and take you out. But it's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in my head. When it's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in your head. When I say harmony in my head. Harmony in your head. Harmony in my head. Harmony in your head. Whenever I'm in doubt about things I do, I too. 'Cause it's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in my head. It's a harmony in my head, in your head, in our head.
Steve Diggle out of Buzzcocks with Harmony in My Head. Steve's memoir, Autonomy, Portrait of a Buzzcock, is out now, and Buzzcocks have shows upcoming in France, followed by dates in Australia, New Zealand and elsewhere. Details at buzzcocks.com. That's all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Chris Chomak, Tom Edwards and Laura Kramer. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Gunnar Gronlid and Sana Jumani. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.
"2024 is a pivotal year for global politics. Meanwhile, conflict, climate change, and AI dominate the headlines. What do these global stories mean for you? The Financial Times offers fearless thinking in defining moments. Its trusted journalists deliver impartial analysis on the world's biggest news events, helping you to form your own bold opinions. Start reading the Financial Times at ft.com.